Hi everyone. So I'm here today chatting with Karen, and Karen's from the UK, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her experience with adoption. So, Karen, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hi, Charlie. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk. I'm an adoptive mom of two, and I live in the UK. I live in England. I'm from America, so you'll be confused by my accent unless I say that. The UK for 11 years, and I've been a mom for 8 years. So, yeah, I'm really excited to share. I'm really proud to be an adoptive mom. It's not easy, there's a lot of ups and downs, but I'm just really happy to answer any questions you might have. If I can help anyone out there who's thinking about whether they want to adopt, please feel free to reach out to me.
That's amazing. Thank you, Karen, and thank you for taking the time to chat about it. We know that there's lots of people in our community who want to explore these different paths to parenthood, and sometimes they don't know where quite know where to start. And I know every journey is different, but it's always interesting to hear different people's personal experiences. And maybe if we can start by taking a bit of a step back, because obviously you have MRKH as well, and obviously that often hits us all quite hard, but everyone kind of processes that, deals with that in different ways. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your experience. How was that for you, the diagnosis process?
Sure, I'm happy to share. Well, I like for anyone, it just completely was a shock. It felt like it came out of the blue when I think I was 15 or 16, and went to see my mom's gynecologist because I hadn't started my period. And that was the beginning of a lot of tests and just sort of a confusing time. This was in the 1990s. So I'm 47 now. And anyone from my generation knows there was just no support. We were really like
Yeah.
so much has changed. And I'm so glad that MRKH is here. MRKH Connect is here now. It's just the sort of thing I needed at the time, but I was all alone, unfortunately. And when I was diagnosed, there wasn't even a term. I was told I had vaginal agenesis, I believe, that I was one in a million,
Oh my goodness.
and I should just not tell anybody. So that really set me up for a real struggle in life. So I tried to sort of throw myself into life in other ways. I ended up becoming an academic, really went to university and graduate school and kept almost just trying to keep busy. And I wasn't dealing with all of the feelings that we know comes with an MRKH diagnosis. So it was only later in life that I found counseling and began to work through all those really difficult feelings of grief that we have, especially over infertility. For me, that was huge. And it was when I was engaged to be married to my now husband, I went to see a therapist to talk about infertility because it was something that, suddenly I had to deal with this. Suddenly I had to be able to talk to a partner about my feelings. And thankfully, I found a really understanding and caring and kind partner who, from the beginning, from the first time I told him, was just really accepting. But I still had all these feelings. So finding a therapist to just go through all of that, to cry and to grieve, was huge for me.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touch on a very sensitive and important topic. I think in our community, the one of infertility, and I think even if not necessarily that everyone wants to have children who has MRKH, but also it's that feeling of not having a choice. I think sometimes that often hits hardest. And for you, was it always something that you had wanted to have children? Or do you know, or whether it was just a feeling that the infertility grief was just so heavy, it was really hard to process that part of the diagnosis?
I think I really was brought up in a culture where that was the model of women I saw. So I grew up in America. My grandparents are Irish and Slovak Catholics. And
Oh,
so both
wow.
those communities, there's just such an emphasis on having lots of children. So I grew up with 30 cousins, in a world where that was just all I saw. I didn't have a role model of a woman who wasn't a wife and a mother. So I was born in 1975, but in some ways I was living in a very much more old-fashioned world. And unfortunately, that caused me a lot of pain because I couldn't talk about how I was feeling so different. I felt so set apart. It's hard for me now looking back to unpick whether that, desire to be a mother was because of that cultural conditioning, because I really didn't know another way. It wasn't until I became an academic and I was teaching university and I saw lots of other women who chose to do life differently, but I
Mm,
haven't had that growing up. So I would say, yes, as a young person, it hit me so hard. That was probably initially the hardest aspect of MRKH for me because I had just assumed I would have children. I hadn't imagined life any other way.
mm,
But my imagination wasn't very big. Looking back, I was in this very narrow world.
mm.
So, yeah.
No, and I think it's so common to be kind of influenced by, well, we can only be influenced by what we know and the life and the people around us, right? So it's not unreasonable that would be where you and many of us have imagined, because that's what we've always kind of grown up to believe, and that's what we're taught in school. There's never, I never remember being taught in school that that wouldn't be a possibility. It was always just this will happen, but sometimes it's just a little bit more difficult. So I think the infertility side is often the hardest bit, and also at the age that we are when we're diagnosed, it's really hard to, how do you process that? It's really, and so as you were saying about the grief that you felt and trying to process that and it being so hard, it's something I think that echoes with a lot of us going through that in those early stages. So thinking about infertility, thinking about getting married and having those discussions with your husband, you subsequently have gone down the adoption route, as you mentioned. Would you mind sharing a bit about kind of what led you down that path? Was there
Yeah, so it was something that was always in the back of my mind, but it wasn't until I was 35 years old and we'd moved and relocated to England, and I thought I just wanted to find out more about it. So I started reading books. I just went online and was reading memoirs of adoptive mothers and started just looking around, and I realized this was something I wanted to learn more about. So my husband was very open to the idea. I would say I probably led the beginning investigation. I signed us up to go to an information night, and he willingly went. And so that it was probably about a year where I was just looking around, exploring, and talking to people. And um the information night we went to was really helpful. I remember there was, I can exactly remember there was a lot of people, nervous people in the audience, and an adoptive mom telling her story. And I felt a little spark of hope. I guess I would just paying attention to how I felt. I thought, oh, yeah, this worked for her. This could happen for me too, So the more and more adoptive parents I met, it just gave me like a new way of looking. Like, look, you were told you couldn't have children, but look at this other way, So it opened up a new world for me. I was, just felt so grateful every time I met another woman who would share her story with me of what it was like to be an adoptive mom. And you mentioned, Charlie, how hard it is for us to be told at 15 or 16 or 17 that we can't have children. I was meeting women in these adoption communities who were 30 or 32 when they
Mm,
found out they couldn't have children, and it almost destroyed some of them, So I had this new compassion for myself because I thought, my gosh, these women had so much more years of experience to draw on, and they were crying in front of me, about their ordeals. And a lot of times they would want to tell me about their IVF procedures. And I would have to say, oh, that's not really relevant to me, or I would feel a little unsure. And, but it was probably healing for me to suddenly be in this world, the adoption community, where people could talk openly about infertility. And I guess I should say that's
mm,
not the only reason people adopt, but I did early on meet a lot of women who that's what drew them to adoption, because there are these families out there who will tell you that adoption was their first choice, and that was it was their
Mm,
calling, it was their passion,
yeah.
it was their way. So I've met so many interesting people through becoming an adoptive parent. I would say that's another benefit of it, is there's a really supportive world out there.
And that's fantastic, because I think that's the hardest thing when you're going through like a journey, what you already know is going to be a complex, complicated, long process to become a parent, to have something that feels supportive, and that you're meeting other people, and and sharing those experiences. And I know exactly what you mean about those people who are facing infertility so much later in life. It gives you a different opportunity to reflect on how your infertility, or our in the community journey, starts so early. In comparison, it gives us much longer to try and process. It doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that we will have anywhere near all of the answers by the time we get to that point, but it's I also I can definitely relate to kind of feeling a little bit more, I don't want to say grateful, but almost grateful, in the sense of, to find out when I did, that I had much longer to try and sit with that and work out what that meant. And I can see people who find out in late 20s, 30s, late 30s. That's incredibly difficult, and has almost a much more kind of hard-hitting impact at that point, because they've grown up and built so much of their life around different elements to build up to that point, which is also really challenging. But yeah, just to go back to the process itself, how did you find the process of adoption? Because I don't know, I would say, too much about how it works. So maybe you could share a little bit about, like, what kind of processes do they go through, and kind of steps and how long does it take, perhaps, overall, if you could share a bit about that.
So the first thing you do is go to these information events and just register your interest, and you have the choice to find what adoption agency you want to apply with. And I feel really fortunate to have been in the UK, because there's such a standardized process. If you just go to your local city council, right, wherever there are these regional offices, which will put you in touch with your most local adoption team. And that's where we started, and that's where we ended up applying, was just really the most local team of adoption. But there are other ways. There are private agencies, and you can find a lot of information online. There's a website called First for Adoption, and maybe I can put that in an email for you.
Absolutely.
And process, so it's very transparent now and straightforward. There's a 2-month period where you have to go through background checks. So it's intimidating, because you're laying yourself bare for all the authorities, right? So it's like applying for a really important job where you need like government security clearance, from America. I had my fingerprints taken and sent back to the FBI in the US. They had to make sure I had no criminal record,
Oh my
so
gosh.
you're going through all that at first thinking, this is unfair. Other people don't have to do this. People get pregnant and have a baby, and I'm having to have my whole life investigated. They're combing through your records. But once you start even just reading a little bit about adoption, it's for the safety of the children who are so vulnerable. They have to make sure there's no chance there's somebody with a criminal background applying. So once you get through all that, I would say that's pretty unpleasant.
I can imagine.
And that should only take 2 months here in the UK. Then there's like a 4-month period where you're matched with a social worker. They come to your house a lot, so you make a lot of cups of tea and they try to get to know you. And that's an intense period, because the social worker is there to support you, but also it's his or her job to evaluate you. So you do feel like, I want to put my best foot forward. And I got in this phase of, I kept cleaning the house. Like before a visit, I would be scrubbing the floors, and my husband was like, we're not applying to be housekeepers or cleaners. What are you doing? But I had so much anxiety. And looking back, I
Mm,
wish I wasn't going to therapy or counseling at that time. I probably needed more help because it was, I guess I'm just a worrier and a sensitive person. And I was always anticipating these visits, like, will I say the right thing? But if you could be more laid back about it and think it's not a bad process, because what they're doing is they're trying to get to know you, and it's very structured. They have like set documents they present to you each visit. They want to know about your family background, how you were raised, how you imagine you would raise a child. Do you know how hard it is to raise a child from trauma? That's a big part of it. Like, are you
mm.
able to be someone who can keep trying to learn new ways? So I felt like it was interesting. I read a lot of child psychology at that time. You know, they kept recommending books, and I'm somebody who loves to learn. So I learned a lot. It made me reflect on my own upbringing. And I kind of knew, um, I was raised in a culture like more of discipline, and children
Mm.
were good and seen and not heard. And I knew I was learning through that time that there are new ways, and like that children who've had any sort of struggle in life, even just from that day one being separated from their birth mom, they're going to need more patience and support and understanding. And you have to approach things differently. So that was all very like eye-opening to me. And to
Mm.
learn children who are in care in the UK kind of opened my heart a lot, because I thought, there's so many children who need homes. They need a loving home. And it made me feel really positive about stepping forward to say we do have the resources to do this.
Wow, that's amazing. And how long, once you've gone through all those checks, and I can imagine it must have felt really strange to have like everything like laid bare. And I guess you know what I the limited amount that I personally know about adoption is that it feels quite invasive. But then, as you say, at the same time, it's all to ensure that the child is safe and protected in that process. And how long, out of interest, did that process take until you were matched with a child or children?
Yeah, so for us, for the first time, the whole process for my husband and I was 3 years before we were matched with our daughter. But they have now passed actually legislative bills that it should only take 6 months before you're, from the time you sign up to you go to panel. So the last step of that stage, you go before a panel, and it's made up of, this is like a surreal memory of walking into a room where there's people who work for on behalf of the children. So there was a pediatrician, there was a adult adoptee who volunteered her time. You know, there were adoptive parents, there were child psychologists. They're all there, and they've read all these documents about your life. So they feel
Wow.
like they know you because they've read everything you've told your social worker through these months. They have like a record, and you walk in, and they're all smiling at you like, why do you want to be an adoptive parent? You know, and it was nerve-wracking, because then you leave the room and they have to all decide, yes, these people are qualified. So it is like but when we got that approval, we felt over the moon. I remember feeling like this was harder to than achieving a PhD. Like this was, I was
Wow.
approved. Like you got this stamp, like you can be an adoptive parent. And I felt like my husband and I both, I remember such a sense of relief. But then it's almost like then there's this wait until you're matched. And that was a hard time, because
Yeah.
like ready now, you're like, yes, we did it, we're approved. But it's important to wait, because your social worker now, her job is to be a family finder. So this job is quite amazing to me. They are going on to all of these other private meetings with social workers around the UK, hearing about children who need homes and trying to find the best fit for you.
Wow.
And you're not in control of that. You know, you have to like let go and trust there's a higher wisdom working. If you're a spiritual person, this is when you like lean on your faith and say, you know, I pray the right child finds us, and it's kind of out of your hands. So there was one time where we were on a um like it was almost like a short list to be a parent to a little boy, and we kept waiting and waiting, and I was getting really interested because I was reading information about this little boy and thinking I could be his mom. And then the judge, they chose another, the committee, I wasn't the judge at that stage, chose another set of parents. And I remember feeling it was like a real loss. It was almost
Yeah.
like a bereavement, you know, or feeling like, and I was really low at that stage. And I thought, I don't know how much more I can go through that again. But thank
No, absolutely.
yeah, so you have to really prepare like emotionally. And looking back, I wish I would have like steeled myself a bit more for that. So then when we were matched with our daughter, it was kind of like I was almost too good to be true. I didn't want to believe it for a while. So
Yeah.
it takes its toll on you emotionally. It's such highs and lows. It was almost like when I was holding her, 'cause she was 10 months old when we met her.
Wow.
It was like, is she really going to be mine? You know, it was that feeling of like your whole life you've been like, I'm not going to be a mom. And then suddenly here's this, once I saw her, this, you know, very specific little child who needs a home, just feels like it's amazing, you know. It almost feels like everything you went through is worthwhile, but not quite. It was really hard. It's really hard to go through it all.
No, no, I can imagine, and you know the reward is amazing, of course, because you're then matched with a child that you're going to give a home that's going to be better than you know whatever maybe came before for them. But that's at the same time, I can't imagine how difficult that must be, that waiting period. And do you get any support in that period? I mean, obviously there's yourself and your husband, but other than, you know, is there other support that's provided by the agency or the social worker?
Our social worker really tried. She was very supportive. After that very sad experience where we weren't chosen, she decided she was going to communicate more with my husband about potential matches to kind of, she could see. So we did have meetings where we talked about what I could do to keep myself spirits up. I remember I was going swimming then. I was going swimming every day, just as like a way
Just
to
like
let
distraction.
distraction. But I felt at that stage my friends and family really didn't know how to help me. And it was looking back, it was a lonely time because I was like full of this feeling of what ready and waiting and wanting to be a mom, but then it was out of my control. It was a very strange time. I think that only lasted like 4 months. It was, but it felt like an eternity, the
Yeah.
wait matching time. And then it happens really fast. So then when we were told about our daughter, within weeks we were in these planning meetings to bring her home. So if you think about, you know, you see people around have these baby showers where they for months and months are getting a
Yeah.
room ready, a nursery, by making registries, being an adoptive mom. You don't want to do that too soon because you're really guarded, like what if it
Yeah, of
doesn't work?
course.
And then you get a call like, well, you've been matched with this baby, and we had to buy everything in 2 weeks time. You know,
Oh gosh.
like it's a roller coaster, um but it was, yeah. So I mean, I would say it's really an adventure, and it's wonderful, and also it demands a lot of you emotionally, is I guess what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get across is it's
It certainly seems like it. And you mentioned you have children by adoption. So you've done this more than once, this
Oh, I did
process.
it again. We did. So I mean, that I guess that speaks to how happy we were at in our, you know, um with adoption, that we, when my little girl was 4, we adopted a little boy, and we then were at a different agency. We went to the agency that my daughter was in foster care in a different city. So basically we've gotten to know that team of adoptive workers. And the second time, when you call up a second time, it's much quicker because they know, oh, it's not just theoretical now or hypothetical. Will you be a
Yeah.
parent? Or we know you're a parent now. We know you're doing a good job. So it happened really fast that we were
Oh
matched with
wow.
a boy, and he was only 6 months old. And that was a different experience because we signed up to be his foster parents. So he needed like a home right away and more quickly than the system works, you know, because it takes
Yeah.
so long to go before a court and a judge approve your adoption order. So that had its own struggles because a child moves in with you, you're, you know,
You're
falling in
getting
love.
attached. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like there was still this feeling of like, oh, I mean, the social workers wouldn't have done that if they weren't quite sure, but there was still this possibility that he would go back to his birth family in some way, and we had to wait for a judge to decide that no, adoption was the best fit for him. So that was intense too. And the yeah, so then it just takes a while. I mean, it's not like I would say I would think, oh, it's going to be really hard when he moved in, and it was hard for my daughter to adjust because she became very jealous, like the sibling
Yeah.
rivalry happened. But it's ongoing. Like there's different phases of challenges, highs and lows
Yeah.
throughout. Yeah, so
Yeah. But they, I mean, obviously they weren't naturally siblings, but they're now siblings
they-
together. Um,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
and do they kind of gel together as siblings? Do you think?
You would think for sure they were birth siblings by the way
Really?
they
Wow.
they see them together. I'm sure at school everyone assumes they're from the same biological family, but it's kind of like a mystery. They fight a lot though, because and I
Yeah.
guess maybe just having different interests, they do quarrel a lot. And that's one of the hardest things right now as a parent I'm dealing with, how to because they both um want so much of my attention, and they get very jealous if I'm paying attention with one versus the other. But it's nothing that I can't, I would say it is more challenging than I thought, adoptive parenting.
Mm.
I think I had very romanticized ideas about being a parent, and I don't know why, I just did. And
I think most parents would probably say that, Karen.
so yeah, I don't want to, I just feel like I would be doing a disservice if I acted like it was all rosy. And like,
Yeah, of
I
course.
actually get quite annoyed sometimes when I look on like Instagram and you see the highlight reels of adoptive parenting, because I think that's only half the picture. Like, you have to paint a full picture, you would see it takes so much endless, like trying new ways, and a lot of patience, and it can be really hard. Yeah, I would say. And I think what I would say to a woman with MRKH is who's thinking about adopting is everything that we have gone through and learned about healing from a very difficult life situation, from trauma, it makes us better mothers to children who've experienced trauma, because there's something I feel like I could only have learned through my own journey that I
Mm,
can help my daughter and son now. I see in
absolutely.
them, and constantly seeing them struggle with these huge feelings of grief over losing their birth mothers.
Mm,
That is still there at every age. I see it manifest in different ways. And I feel that what I've learned through my own journey is allowing me to sit with them in that grief, like I'm not going to brush it over. I'm not going to say, this adoption is easy. It's hard for everyone. And when we talk about adoption, they often have an image of a triangle, and they call it the adoption triad. And there's like the birth mother and birth father on one point, the adoptive parents on another, and then that child. And we're all linked, and I think we're all linked by a huge loss. You
mm,
know, Adoption starts from a loss on
of
every
course.
point, but it's wonderful that we can, for that child, help them to heal. So I
Mm,
feel like adoption is breaking a cycle of
mm,
loss, breaking a cycle of dysfunction in the case of a lot of children, and giving them a new family. So
mm.
it's intense.
Yeah, no, it sounds it, and you alluded to it in terms of your children's respective birth mothers and the loss related to that. So, and obviously they were very young when you adopted them. So it seems to me, I hope I'm not assuming that you've been quite open about the fact to
Yeah,
them that they are adopted. And yeah,
yes.
I wonder how do you approach that kind of discussion? How does that evolve so that they understand at what is presumably quite a young age that those topics start to get filtered into a discussion, if
Yes.
you
And
don't mind sharing, of course.
glad you asked, because that's so important, because I think in an earlier time people were very reticent to talk about adoption with adopted children. But of course, every stage of their life, they want to know why, what happened, so this is a place where getting help from your adoption team is really
Okay.
important. So our adoption agency helped create a life story book for our children. So they came from being, they weren't even 1 year old. They had a picture book with pictures of their birth family, with pictures of me and my husband, and they wrote it out as like a storybook. Your birth family couldn't look after you for this reason, so they really tried, and I was encouraged to like go through the pictures with my daughter. So there's been different times in her life where she's been more or less interested in that. So you kind of have to go with her interests, but there is a temptation to just forget about it and brush it all aside. There's a program in the UK called Letterbox where you write letters to birth family members if they want to be written and
Ah,
sent updates.
okay.
It goes through a safe meeting ground. So twice a year, I write letters that will then reach my child's birth mother, and she writes back. And it's usually at that time I get a letter from her that I feel motivated to then take out the pictures and say, this is where she is now. This is what's happened. This is what she's doing, and sometimes that sets especially my son back. He'll get angry and regress because it's almost too much for him. He's only really little now. But I feel like from everything I've been taught is keeping that conversation open helps child build a sense of their identity rather than withholding information. But so it's a constant struggle, like what can I share with them in an age appropriate way? But I always tell them, they also go to therapy. I should mention
I
through
was just going to ask, actually. Yeah.
yeah, there's a government fund called the Adoption Support Fund. Any adoptive family in the UK can apply, and you get a yearly stipend, a budget that you can spend
Wow.
on different therapies. So it's our second year of having that grant, and it's helped both my children have a therapist we see once a week. And so she does like play therapy with them, and they talk about adoption. So I hope that by doing all of this work now, they'll grow up with more of a acceptance and
Mm.
understanding of their life story. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean that sounds such an inclusive way to approach adoption, and it's similar to you. I remember hearing, or even on television when it was, dared to be talked about in terms of adoption comes up as a storyline. It was always something that was hidden, and then as an adult, someone finds out that for whatever reason or cause, their parents are not who they thought they, or their biological parents, I should say, are not
Ah,
who they thought
okay.
they were. But I think it's really interesting to how to approach that kind of storytelling, that life storytelling to your children and to adoptive children, to actually explain that process. I think I mean, it's quite an adult topic in many ways for a child. Kind of similar, I don't know, it made me think of our own journeys and having those same discussions with our parents on the topics around MRKH. As obviously we were a bit older, but the same kind of challenges of where to draw the line in terms of, you want to talk about it but you don't want it to be like
Right.
you're there all the time and it's bringing up too much emotion. So there must be some things, I think, from what you were saying as well, from your own experiences, that have been really valuable in how you approach that in a way that can be as nurturing as possible at a difficult time.
That's absolutely it, Charlie, because I know you just brought back memories of myself as a teenager when my mom would want to talk about it. It would feel the wrong time for me, or, it felt like she was always tiptoeing around it. When can I talk? And so I'm trying to be more open with my children, but I do get that same pushback. I have had a time where my child threw the life story book across the room,
Oh
like,
dear.
not in the mood for it, mom. No more about adoption today. So it is hard to know, but I think I would say at every stage of parenting my children, something has come up that makes me realize, go back and reflect on myself in my MRKH journey, and I find a part of me that's not healed yet. I mean, it's like the similarities are so great. You know, I can see they're hurting in this particular way, and then I can like go back and see the like inner child in me still hurting over over an MRKH related issue. So there's so many parallels, and I can only think that that must be, you know, meant to be, that I can help them because I have all of this um awareness now about grief and loss. And I think, as I said before, just from what I've learned from hearing all of these child psychologists talk, just being able to sit with a child and acknowledge their pain, to offer your empathy, to not try to hurry up and change it and make it better, but just to admit this is hard. You lost your birth mother, you lost your birth father, you had to switch families when other children were being completely coddled and protected. You were in foster care, you were sent to a stranger, you were scared, you know, you didn't know who was going to take care of you. So you build up these defenses where you said, I'll take care of myself. And this is especially what I see with my daughter. She wanted to be completely self-sufficient and push away any figure, and that is called attachment theory. If you study a particular strand of child psychology related to adoption, you'll learn all about how we as babies and infants learn to attach. And when something's disrupted in that attachment to our birth mother, we have struggles all throughout our relationship building. And I felt like with MRKH, I could see that was an attachment rupture for me with my own mother. Even though I was a teenager, I completely separated. I couldn't talk with her about it. And I thought, I'll just have to take care of myself. I had to put these walls up. You know, I didn't let anyone in. And I still really struggle in my marriage with intimacy because I feel like there's part of me that's been so steeled against being vulnerable. And I see that in my daughter, and I feel like, wow, I can understand what she's going through, even though she's pushing me away.
Yeah. Oh, it must be a really a strange feeling to kind of see almost in a mirror, kind of your own experiences being played out in your children, and particularly in your daughter, and how that's bringing up and, you know, also re-triggering some of your experiences. Yeah, that's I'm sure it must be helpful from what you're saying about, you know, exploring this yourself through therapy, because you know, that's a difficult time for all of you, and especially trying to process some of these emotions that were perhaps buried very, very deep, as for many of us they are, particularly back in the days where there wasn't the support services that are available today. It's and in terms of, and I think you've probably kind of touched on it, but what would you say is the hardest part of being an adoptive parent? Is it trying to nurture your children knowing the trauma that they've been through, or would that be the hardest part, and the grief and everything that they're trying to manage?
I think you've got it, Charlie. Seeing them struggle with that trauma is it can be heartbreaking at times, and to
Mm.
know you can't really fix it. You know, you're um there's this wonderful image called the trauma lake. I'll try to find the image for you. It's
Oh,
from a
great.
therapeutic parenting book, and it pictures like this giant lake and that there's pebbles being thrown in. Um, and each day, you know, you throw in a new pebble, a new pebble, a new pebble, and they tell us, as to be therapeutic parents, every day we're putting a pebble in a lake. And we might not see in our children that the water is, you know, dissipating and becoming solid ground until they're 20, 25 even. You know, it might take us a lifetime to help them, you know, with that trauma, with that primal loss that they've had. And so it's just, sometimes you can get so discouraged. Am I making a difference? You know,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
have we come anywhere? Are we still, you know, on the same ground, circling over this loss? But I think that's helped me, is to really just have a faith that um we are getting somewhere. It's just going to take time, you know. So that's what's really hard. And for me with my daughter, the hardest thing was to try to pour your love into a child who can't receive that love, because you
Mm.
feel you can get so discouraged. And what can help you keep going, I would say, is, you know, you have to be getting help yourself, and you have to meet other adoptive moms who you can talk to openly and say, I'm having a really hard day. This is really, that her behavior is really challenging right now. Um, and I feel so lucky that my husband's on board. You can adopt as a single person, and I've met through the adoption community some really strong, wonderful women and men who've chosen to adopt on their own, but they often have extended family around them, or hopefully they have friends who will help them. I feel like what I've learned is you can't really raise a child alone. They always say it takes a village. I think with adopted children, I don't know, maybe it takes 10 villages. It takes as many people as can help you,
Yeah.
to be willing to ask and accept help is huge.
Yeah. But that's amazing that you also have a support network, not just your husband, but also a support network from the adoption community that that you're able to reach out to and chat and share those experiences, because I can imagine that must be, really, essential for you as well, and for them to have that kind of space, because it must be very difficult for someone just like with MRKH, I guess, where of course we have lots of friends in who have different experiences, and we can share and feel comforted by those people, but sometimes sharing with someone who really understands what that process is like, it really can make a big difference to answering that particular question, or that really bad day that we're having because of something that can be really hard to explain to people who aren't living that process at that time. So and are these people that are local that you're able to meet, or is it more like a kind of online resource that you're able to tap into?
Yeah, there are two special friends I've made through a local. When I first adopted, there was a new adoptive parents group where you brought your baby, and and
Oh,
there were only two women showed up, and there were supposed to be 10, and they both lived within a half hour's drive of me. They were both writers, they were both brand new parents, and we have kept up, so
oh, that's
every
brilliant.
we met every week with our children when they were 1 and 2 years old. And they became like my lifeline, because they understood, like you said, just like meeting another woman with MRKH, I don't have to explain. I can I can just we do a lot of texting and things, and now they've both gone back to work and are quite busy. And that's another thing I should say I didn't expect. I have not resumed my career, so I am now a
Mm,
full-time mom. My children both um, developed special needs. It was through COVID, and we
okay.
both became diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and they've needed me in such a way that I just couldn't go back to my academic work. And I try to do some writing here and there, but I feel like right now it's taking all my attention. So that's something I would say if you're thinking about adopting, and obviously every child will be different. Not every adoptive child will have the special needs that my kids do, but I was lucky that my husband is still working, and I wouldn't have anticipated. If you'd asked me, 8 years ago when we adopted a daughter, I would have thought I would have been right back to work right away. But it took over my life. It really, my life's work now is raising the kids, and that's different for everyone. But just to be aware that you would need a flexible schedule if you were going on adoptive parenting, or someone in your family needs to have that flexibility, after
Yeah,
school, really tricky, and before school and things like that. So yeah, so there's like
yeah.
trade-offs, I guess. I do miss being a college teacher. I miss that a lot, but this like my life went a whole different direction with adoption. So
Yeah. But I think that's it's something really important to note, because I think it's often uh not forgotten, but it's very easy not to think about it as an impact. And I think, as you say, there's with the best will in the world, you have an expectation that you'll get back to your career, you'll do this, and sometimes it just doesn't work like that. So I think you're right, having an understanding that, and a flexibility that if you need to, that there is a way that you can be more flexible with either the work that you do, or take some time out, and then, you know, reevaluate when you're in a position to be able to do that, because, yeah, that's it's tough to get that balance, and also to, you know, as we find with everything right now, it's, you know, tough to see if it's even possible to be flexible, but, you know, now post COVID things are perhaps a bit more flexible for some people, being able to work more at home, and but yeah, different considerations that I think is easy to kind of forget when you're going through that process, about the other impacts it might have on, you know, your career, your relationship perhaps with your partner as well, and, you know, and everything else that comes with it. And I'm interested, just to kind of couple more questions, if I may. I'm interested, obviously you've been very open with your children going through this process, sharing their life stories with them, and helping them, you know, learn their grief and loss and what this means for them. But are you, is it a topic that you speak openly about with others, in terms of kind of educating others, your friends and perhaps other family members, about adoption, or is that approached in a different way? And yeah, only if you're comfortable to answer that, because I know it's a big topic, and it can be a bit harder to answer.
I have found I've had to step into a role of educating others about adoption. And
Yeah.
you know, maybe if my career takes a shift, I think I might retrain in this area, because it just happened that with all the school professionals you meet, once my children started school, I could see they needed extra help, and teachers aren't necessarily trained in understanding children with developmental trauma, is what we would explain for a child who their first months of life were so disrupted, that developmental trauma affects their ability to learn, it affects their neurobiology. And so I was at first reluctant, but finally had to realize, anytime, you know, this started when they first went to nursery school, to, you know, now they're in primary school, but I'm constantly having to have meetings and saying, oh, maybe they're behaving in this way has something to do with, you know,
Yeah.
an adopted child needs extra time in this way. Or so that is part of my role. And it depends with other parents that I meet here and there. It really, you have to feel out, do they deserve hearing the truth or not? You know, like some people you
Of course.
meet can feel isolating, because sometimes especially when I was very new to be a mom with this little baby, and I'd see these mom groups, and they have here in the UK, you're paired into this there's some sort of organization when you are pregnant, you're matched with other women and you all become friends. And I would live in this little village, and there was literally this group of moms with 1-year-olds, and I had a 1-year-old, but they had been friends all through their pregnancy and
Yeah.
their children are now still friends. Their children are in year 4 and all best buddies. And I was like there with my little daughter, like, can I have coffee with you? You know, but it was awkward, because then they would always be talking about breastfeeding. They would always be retelling the delivery stories, and I would
Oh
feel
gosh.
like, would have like a panic of like, gotta call my 2 adoptive mom friends, you know? So it
Ah,
was
what do I do?
really early on, and I thought I wasn't really prepared for that. Like, and so now I have to kind of gauge whether they are the kind of open and kind enough people that I want to share what it's like to be an adoptive mom. Sometimes I think they just won't get it, and I have to kind of let that go. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, and I wonder, um also, because, you know, we know sharing topics that lots of people don't have experience with is more challenging, and I wonder if it's a kind of similar approach to how we approach sharing about MRKH, in the sense that, you know, we don't tell everyone, or most people don't tell everyone, but also it's, you know, like you're saying, like, is it, are they, will they understand, is it worth me sharing this, and will they be nice and kind and, you know, responsive to that, and I, obviously not having gone through that process, I can imagine it's those same kind of feelings that, you know, I've had in the past about sharing MRKH diagnosis with someone. It's a bit of a battle, and it's challenging, but it must feel very strange going, you know, going through that, as you say, with the baby groups and things, and feeling a bit more isolated because your process is a bit different, and that must be really hard. But then so nice that you have this network with the other adoptive parents, that you have, you're not alone in those thoughts, because I imagine they probably had similar experiences perhaps.
They feel the same, yes. So, yeah, I would say it is really important to find other like-minded parents, and there's a lot of groups out there online, like on Instagram or things like that, but for me, I don't like to share that much about my children for their own privacy. So you
Of
always have to like think that question of disclosure is always coming up, like what do I really want to share here or
yeah,
not? So
of course.
we're familiar with that. So, like, I guess once again, my theme would be everything we go through with healing and understanding our own journey helps you become a really sensitive adoptive parent, because I think through that question of privacy and disclosure. I've probably thought about it more than the average person. So,
Yeah. It's such an important topic, and it's so important, I think, when, in your case as well, where you're also responsible for the disclosure and the privacy of your children until they're at an age that they can make those decisions themselves. And it's a different perspective, particularly nowadays, where there's so much of our lives are online and so much is shared online. It's yeah, it becomes a much more challenging topic than any of us would have imagined when we were when we were
I
younger
know.
and in a similar, similar stage of our lives. So it's yeah, a very complicated time to be a parent, I would say.
It sure is.
So two more things before we close. And I really thank you so much for sharing everything. It's been, really amazing hearing your experiences. But is there, and this is probably going to be a difficult one to answer, but is there a specific part about your journey or experience that you would change? Is there something that you wish was different in terms of that process, perhaps, that would have made things easier, or whatever that may be? Is there something?
Yeah, I would have asked for help more early on. And I think it was part of my own kind of wanting to be a perfectionist and a people pleaser. I wanted to make adoptive parenting look really easy and seamless at first. But when I look back at photos of myself with my daughter in that first year, I was really frightened to say, actually, this is harder than I thought. This is actually bringing up a lot of really, big feelings for me. And I didn't seek that funding from the Adoption UK support group until 2 years ago. And I think I should have reached out for help from day one and said, we're going to need some help here. We're going to need, and I'm going to need a safe place to talk about the ups and downs of my feelings, because it's only when I'm really, able to express everything that I can like be the best parent I can be, in a safe place is what I mean. Like through therapy has helped me have that safe place to talk about the difficulties, and then I feel more grounded and stronger. And I think it was part of that experience of when you're applying to be an adoptive parent and you want to show I'm going to be this amazing parent, then you don't even want to admit or let yourself feel it's actually really hard.
Yeah.
And I made a mistake there. I shouldn't have done that, or I did the wrong thing, and I felt like I had to be super perfect mom, and I couldn't say it was hard. So I wish from the beginning I had more support. And yeah, I would say if you're out there listening to this, any adoptive parent out there, find someone you can talk to. You can't bottle up your feelings. You need to keep having that support for you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So important, and so easy to forget, as you say, in the process. So easy to think, oh, it's going to be fine, I've got this, but and it's so hard to admit sometimes that you do, that any of us need help for whatever reason. It's often the hardest step you have to take, to say, no, actually, I'm going to need some help here. But it's great to hear that there are, particularly in the UK at least, resources that make that possible, that there are access to those support services. And no, that's fantastic. So I guess the last question I'd ask is, and I think you probably covered some of these, but maybe we could kind of sum it up in the last question is, what advice would you give that next person, perhaps that next person with MRKH who's going on this journey? What would be your kind of pointers, your best tips and advice for how to approach it?
Right. Speaking to sorry, Charlie, do you mean speaking to someone who's newly diagnosed with MRKH or someone who's thinking about adoption? What?
Sorry, someone who's thinking about adoption.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I would just want to say to anyone who's thinking about adoption to keep, maybe if the door is open a bit, keep pushing it open a bit more, keep exploring and investigating, and really pay attention to how you feel. Like for me, it was when I had those like light bulb moments of excitement when I met another adoptive parent, really try to like tap into your own sense. Is this right for me? Does this feel right? So much of even finding the right adoption agency or the right social worker has to come down to, do I feel safe and comfortable here? And then when you go to being matched with a child, you really have to reflect, does this feel right? Does this feel like this is the right fit for me? So just to take all the time you need, don't rush into anything, just explore, read, ask people to share their stories, because adoptive parents are usually so proud of their journey and they would love to share with you. Ask if you can visit an adoptive family that you might be a friend of a friend, we will welcome you in and share the highs and lows with you, and I think people do really get frightened. Could I love a child who isn't biologically linked to me? And I can say absolutely 100%, you really, really can. I mean, we really underestimate our ability to love, and if you've been in a romantic partnership, you can love someone who's not genetically linked to you, right? 100%. So don't be scared. I think it is scary because so many messages we get in society are about, or about that fear, like what could happen if if it goes wrong. But I just want to say, that it is possible to build a wonderful family through adoption. And if it feels like you're being called to do it, just take that next step. Don't be shy to ask for help. You can email me, give me a call, and I'd be happy to share more.
Oh, Karen, thank you so much. And I really want to give you a big hug right now.
Thank you.
But no, I really appreciate it, and thank you. And I hope everyone that's listening to this gets a lot of value from what you've said, because I think we've touched on so much stuff in the last kind of 45 minutes of chatting, and so many kind of emotions that come up with this topic. So I just want to say a massive thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for chatting with me today, and I look forward to having the chance to give you that hug in person very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.